Welcome back to another episode of DiResta's Cut. In this episode, I'm going to make a third tool tote. In the background there you see two previous tool totes that I've made, one by hand and one on the CNC machine. And this one's going to be made from steel, a steel frame, and I want to start with a form. Then I'm going to be able to make the same exact steel frame for the left and right side in exactly the same shape. So I just take a few minutes and make this symmetrical form that I'm going to weld on. And since I'm going to weld, I try and cut away some of the wood so that I don't cause a fire. Although I'm just going to simply tack it together, so it's not going to be too dangerous. And now I'm starting with 3/8 inch rod, and I cut all my pieces a little bit long because I like to be able to weld the metal together and then grind it to the perfect shape. Very rarely will I be able to weld and get my joints perfect, so I'm going to have to grind quite a bit. So I always leave everything a little bit longer than it really needs to be. In this case, I'm trapping these angles by the top and the very next piece, so they have to be sort of close in size. And there's all my pieces for the left and right side. And now here I'm just tacking these pieces of metal around this form. And of course when you weld, everything has a tendency to open up a little bit or expand. And so that last joint traps everything sort of like a loop. So each one of these joints open up a little bit, but then when I weld the last piece together right there, everything kind of pulls back in. And now I just fill in all those gaps with weld. And they're both the same size. And now I grind and make sure all my joints are nice and clean. It obviously helps to be able to do this on a belt grinder, but you could use any kind of grinder as long as you're careful. All my outside joints are easy to do. My inside joints are more difficult, so I'm using a die grinder to get very close. And of course I could use a hand file, which I actually did quite a bit off camera. But then I also got a chance to experiment and use my die filer, which you'll see right now, which is an auto filer. And there it is. It's from the 1920s. I bought it used from a machine shop here in Manhattan, and he had put a new motor on it. It come with a bunch of files. It's actually the second or third time I had a chance to use it, and it's really convenient to have. And so now that I have my left and right sides that are symmetrical and the same, now I'm making up the 4 rods that are going to connect it left and right. So the length of these rods, which is 20 inches, determines how long my toolbox is going to be. And I have those steel angles, and there I welded my first piece in. Those steel angles help me keep everything straight and square. And there I used a piece of 4-inch scrap wood to make sure that my 2 rails on either side were parallel. And of course that helps where I can make this parallel all the way around. And my design will consist of one strip of leather that's going to be framed at that 4-inch space all the way around. And I use my battery operated grinder, which is extremely convenient to not have a cord dragging around. I just got that, so it's very convenient. And so now, since I'm going to trap leather in these frames, this is 1/4-inch steel. I'm going to tack the 1/4-inch steel in to frame each one of the sides. And that's a scrap of leather that I have to make sure that I have enough clearance. There I'm TIG welding because it's just a little bit more of a delicate operation. So I'm TIG welding. I'm kind of tacking it in place. There's no reason to fill that whole entire strip with weld because I'm just simply holding a piece of leather in place. And these 5 or 6 tacks that I'm putting on everything is more than enough strength. And so everything is tack welded in place. Those screw clamps I get at garage sales and flea markets, those things are really convenient, the little steel ones for machinists. And I have to put a bottom in this too, so I have all my sides framed. And I have to do all the short sides too, which I think I do off camera. And now here I have to put the bottom in. Between that last shot and this shot, you'll notice on the short 4-inch sides, each corner also now has a piece of 1/4-inch steel in it. And now I'm welding in the bottom, because the bottom is going to be a piece of leather that needs to be supported from underneath. So I just split the space at the bottom into 4 sections, and then I put 3 support rods in place. And now here you see a closer look at how each section is framed. And a lot of people are going to comment that this is heavy and why would I do this, and this is crazy, and why would you ever make anything out of steel that's meant to be a toolbox. But this is an experiment in fashion and design, and this is a gift my girlfriend made in the style of her furniture with leather and steel. And it's going to sit in her studio, and it's not going to be carried to and from anywhere. It's just going to be a tool carrier within the confines of her work area. And I was thinking how I was going to put a handle on it, which is why I left it to this moment in time. By welding it up from underneath, you have the opportunity to hang cables and cords off the end of each one of those ends. And this is my blackener, by the way. I just did that so people could freeze frame on it and read that. Even though I put that slow motion freeze frame in there, people are going to still write me emails and ask me what that is called, which is always funny. And you can see it clearly right there. And now I just spritz it on there. And now this is Permalac, which again, you could freeze frame that and write that name down. This is a lacquer finish in satin, and 2 or 3 coats of this darkens everything. And will give you a nice clean satin finish. And the finish is a little bit more vintage. It doesn't necessarily look like black paint, because you could still see some tones throughout the metal. Now this is 8-ounce shoulder I picked up from Tandy Leather online. It was about $40 for that piece, maybe, and the piece was a little bit bigger. And so now I'm putting it in the bottom. That's my first piece. And I counter roll it. I roll it the opposite direction to keep it from rolling up out of my way. And I'm using goop. Again, I did a freeze frame on there so you could see it. Goop is, they sell it as shoe goop and boat goop and household goop. It's all the same. And it works great. It's a silicone that has some etching qualities, so it feels like it might have some acetone or some methyl chloride in it or something. You notice I put some weights on there. Once this stuff dries, it holds really well. It holds all different types of metals, and plastics, and woods, and leather, and fabric, and rubber. It seems to work really great on a lot of stuff. So there I'm just precisely cutting the pieces that are going to go inside the frame. Just adding some more glue, and I made that fit nice and tight. And again, I'm just putting pressure right along those rails with some steel weights. And that takes about 15 minutes to tack up. And now I'm cutting other pieces. I was able to get mostly everything I needed out of that one piece. And now I'm heat stamping it before I glue it on, because if that heat stamp didn't come out good, I would have regretted gluing it in place first. And also I wanted the back pressure of the tabletop. And so now that I'm happy with that stamp, I'm going to glue it in place. That heat stamp was by my friend Tony Ralou. He's been making them for all the makers. So Tony, thank you for that. And there you go. I wanted to just try something a little different for the short pieces, so I used CA glue, which is a little dangerous because the minute it seeps out of those cracks, it makes an everlasting stain. And it worked really well. So I used CA glue and goop. And there's just a couple details of the finished metal work. This was a fun project. I'd like to make more things like this. And once that leather starts to age, it's going to look real pretty. The overall weight is about 5 or 6 pounds. And I just give it a little test run. Just clean up my bench and carry everything away. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this.